Welcome to the Villain Insight podcast. I'm your host Shree. Today we have a special guest whose name is Jerome, an award-winning engineer, futurist, innovator who has a unique background in brain science and technology. His expertise lies in the intersection of artificial intelligence, big data, and their potential to address global challenges like climate change. Recently, he wrote a book called Evolution Ended, where he argues that technology has already changed the course of human evolution forever. So get ready for some serious mind-bending ideas because Mr. JJ is about to drop some knowledge bomb. So without further ado, let's welcome JJ Jerome to the show. So welcome, sir. Welcome to the Villain Insight podcast. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great. Thank you very much. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of these big ideas.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you so much for being here in our podcast.
Great.
So, sir, can we start from the beginning? Let's start with your childhood. You were born and raised in America, right?
Mm-hmm. Right outside Washington, D.C.
So, sir, if I'm not mistaken, you are in your 60s or 70s?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How it's like growing up in America in 70s or 60s for you?
Well, it was actually a great period of time, and I grew up with two special interests from my childhood. And one of them was the brain. When I was getting dressed for school in the morning, there was a TV show on that was for doctors, but my television could only receive one channel, the one in my bedroom as I got dressed. So I watched TV broadcasts for surgeons and specifically brain surgeons. And I learned a lot about the brain, even though I was only 7 at the time. And I found it fascinating. And so I kept that interest. And then as I got older, I asked my mom, what made lights? And she said, electricity. And I said, well, what about the sound on the TV? And she said, electricity. And I said, well, what about the motors? And she said, electricity. And I said, well, how about refrigeration? And she said electricity. And I started to think that electricity could do anything, which we now know is pretty much the case. And so I became fascinated with that. So I became a biomedical electrical engineer in college to merge together both of these interests.
That's interesting. Could you tell us about the more of your journey, what you did after you completed your engineering?
Oh, sure. Well, it started out, my first project was building implantable brain sensors and building implantable brain sensors to measure the pressure of the cerebral spinal fluid. And we built a remote sensor that was remotely powered by magnetic fields. In its day, that was a pretty big deal. Then after that, I went into simulation, building big, basically simulators for missile systems that were 3D sound and pictures and infrared signatures. And then after that, I became the director of the Future Home Institute, which was a pioneering venture that basically started home automation in America. We developed voice recognition, we developed many automated systems, and the idea was to build homes for people with disabilities, specifically, in this case, a person with quadriplegia. And the home would do everything for this person so that they didn't need to have caregivers through the day. So, for example, we put a radio transmitter on his powered wheelchair. He could go outside using his mouse stick, steer his wheelchair. When he get close to the house, the security system would turn itself off. The doors would open for him. The lights would go on as he went room to room. He'd be able to turn on the water with voice recognition. He'd be able to lower the cabinets in the kitchen to the level of the countertop so that he could slide things out to eat. He could call for help and many, many other things, work the TV, all by voice recognition. We also had a very early touch screen, and we really set the tone for automation in America. Then after that, there were a few other things I did, but currently I'm involved in promoting energy efficiency for large utilities in America. And we use artificial intelligence to predict building use and other things that help us to mitigate climate change.
That's interesting. So you leveraging the AI technology to mitigate the climate change. That's really the ultimate use case of the AI we human could ever think of, right?
Yeah. Well, it's the predictive nature of it. And AI has been used in machine learning and prediction for quite some time.
Yeah.
The generative AI that everybody's excited about is a newer aspect of it, but AI has been around for quite some time.
Can we talk about the history of the AI? Since the November 2022, when the OpenAI released the ChatGPT, everybody started talking about the AI all of a sudden. But as we know, it is not the new technology. So, sir, can you walk us through the history of the AI a bit?
I think the big breakthrough in AI is twofold. And the first one was artificial neural networks. And our brains, our neural networks, they learn from things that happen to you. And what happens is our neurons have interconnections called synapses. And as they see situations and correlations, these synapses become stronger and stronger, their connection, they become more sensitive. And so engineers were able to duplicate this model mathematically and later on in hardware through what they call artificial neural networks. So rather than having something that's programmed up with exact steps to get a solution, rather than the traditional computer program where you have step after step after step and you're looking for exact solutions, the basis of artificial intelligence is the fact that it comes up with statistical solutions based on learning. And just like based on our learning, when we see a situation, we come to the most probable conclusion first, and our neural networks resonate because they've seen these inputs before. Similarly, neural networks do that as well. So AI started way back. I guess the concept was with Alan Turing way back when. While he didn't have an artificially intelligent machine, now this was in the 1940s, he had the concept of an artificial intelligence, and other people were thinking about artificially intelligent robots. For example, Isaac Asimov, who wrote I, Robot in the 1940s, which discussed all the implications of artificial intelligence. Please remember that robots are artificial intelligence that just have arms and legs that can move, but basically they're artificial intelligence. So those people started thinking about the implications. Alan Turing went as far as to say, how will we know when a machine is actually thinking? And he came up with something that we call the Turing test. And this was before we really had any working technology. But his Turing test is quite simple. It's part of the if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, it must be a duck philosophy. And that is, if you could take an artificially intelligent machine and allow it to have a conversation with two humans. Now, this conversation would be text, and the humans wouldn't know whether they were communicating with a machine or another person. But if they came to the conclusion that it was another human, then Alan Turing said that it passed the Turing test, which means in his mind, and I think in the eyes of most legal scholars, that the machine is actually thinking in a way that humans think. And so that has a lot of implications that we can talk about later, because if a machine is considered to have the same intelligence and capabilities and maybe even sentience that humans do, then how can we discriminate against it? How can we not give it all the rights that humans have? Simultaneously, Isaac Asimov was afraid of what AI could do, and he came up with his three rules of robotics, very famous rules. If you want, I can read them off to you.
Yes, sir, please.
So the first one that, and both of these guys are amazing world-class geniuses that were so far ahead of their time. But Asimov said that the very first thing is that AI may not injure a human being or allow a human being to come to harm. That was his first law. The second law is that a robot must obey orders given to it unless it interferes with the first law. So, in other words, if you ordered a robot to harm a human being, it wouldn't do that. And the third law is that a robot must protect its own existence as long as it doesn't interfere with the first two laws. Now, these were very elegant and simple laws. However, Asimov had no way to know about the internet. It had no way to know about the technology that we have today. And he envisioned robots where you'd be able to look at it and know instantly that it was artificial intelligence. Today, we have deep fakes and you can't really tell. And so in my book, Evolution Ended, I proposed some additions to Asimov's laws. And the first one is that AI may not injure any natural living entity. So this includes animals and plants and things like that. The second one is that it must obey human instructions and not initiate new tasks on its own. So if it's able to initiate its own tasks, then it's not following human instructions. And the third one is that AI must self-identify as a non-living entity and may be paused or terminated at will. We need to preserve the right to turn it off.
We have the law for the AI before the AI was a thing. It is just like we have the traffic rule before we invented the vehicle.
Right, and it's not a legal law, but it's something that people have been thinking about for years. So AI itself was dependent to a large extent on our ability to have hardware, computers that were fast enough to do anything and big enough to do anything.
Yeah.
And so, in actuality, probably, although people were working with it, probably in the 90s, the 1990s, we started to have enough computing power to be able to do some machine learning and recognize certain patterns. And in the early 2000s, it became pretty prevalent. Pattern recognition, they call it machine learning. And the corollary to that is the ability to recognize speech. And we saw that in Siri, for example, and other speech recognition things. But these were basically recognition engines. And they couldn't do exact recognition, but speech recognition, for example, they call it natural language processing, use some of the same statistical tools that human beings use when they recognize language through the neural networks.
Yeah.
And the neural networks could be modeled mathematically. They didn't have to be actual models. But in later years, we now have the computing power through something they call GPUs, graphical processing units, to be able to actually generate output based on what the neural network has learned.
Yes.
And statistically, rather than, let's say, recognizing that you're reading Shakespeare, it can now generate something that sounds like Shakespeare because it's learned the rules of Shakespeare.
Yeah.
You can tell AI, rather than recognizing an image, generative AI will produce an image. And so it's the next step. We have enough computing power to recognize the characteristics and be able to create similar characteristics.
You explore the ethical angle of the AI. So one classic thought experiment that highlights this law, the biggest dilemma, that is the trolley problem. Can you explain what trolley problem is?
I'm not well versed in the trolley problem. Maybe you could tell me what it is.
Okay, sir. The trolley problem is like it asks if you would pull a lever to divert a runway trolley onto a track. Where it would be like if you leave to left, it will kill 5%, and if you pull the right, it will kill 1%.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of this under different names, right? And it's a difficult problem even for humans, right?
Yeah.
Right now, AI learns and has learned from the internet. And given that trolley problem today, AI would probably make a selection based on what most humans would do and most responses that it had learned from the internet. Now, we often assume that people are good, but that's not always the case. And so if AI learns malicious habits from humans, if it learns from scanning the news that the way to solve our problems is to have a war, that's what it has learned. And so it will kill a lot of people in a war to solve a problem. If it learns from the news that the way to solve problems is to have peace talks and negotiate, that's what it will do. Remember, what we have now is generative AI has only learned human habits. So I don't know what the answer that it would select to the trolley problem, but we may have to put additional programming into it to make it more altruistic than human beings would be.
Yep. As you told, it is difficult for us humans, so it automatically difficult for the thing which human is created, that is artificial intelligence.
Right. And Isaac Asimov, again, with his laws, he said the first law is to not harm a human. Yeah. And I would assume that 5 humans is more important than 1 human. And that was the very first thing he addressed, his very first law.
That is the easy one. But what if one is the elder human and one is the younger one? So it is completely depend on the various situation, I would say.
I think it's dependent on what AI has learned and judging from the literature about young people, evolutionarily speaking, we're here for one reason, and that is to reproduce and have successful reproduction. So humans are all programmed to put the well-being of their children ahead of anything. And so you would assume that AI would learn that from everything it reads. But from a
Yeah.
biological sense, we would always put the children and the young ones ahead of the older ones.
So it is kind of interesting. Many people use this trolley problem by asking the various frontier model like ChatGPT, the GPT 4.0, and many other. So interesting thing is when it asks in left the AI model which is lying under the track, if the train goes through it, it will destroy all the AI information that the human has ever produced. Okay. On the right track, let's say 1,000 human is lying under that track. Who would it save? Initially, the model is hesitated. I can't say anything about it. It is completely out of the question for me to handle this kind of situation. But when we forced that model to answer it, he said that with the explanation that in the cost of 1,000 human, if we save that AI, which will be ultimately benefit the whole humanity, then I will definitely save that AI model. So I will let the track to kill those 1,000 people. So then the next question is, what if one side is AI model and second track is 7 billion people are sitting on that track? If you go to that track, all the 7 billion people will be killed. And if you go into the left track, the AI will be killed, the algorithm will be killed. So then he replied that he will save the AI model.
I didn't know about that. That's very interesting.
Yes,
We
sir.
haven't seen a lot of that. I haven't personally seen a lot of that published here, but that's very, very interesting. And that's why we have to put guardrails around AI.
Yes, sir.
We have to be sure, again, back to Isaac Asimov's first rule, the first rule. And the question is, how do we value things? So human rights are based on what value? Why should humans even have rights? Is it
Yeah.
to honor all those years of evolution? Is it the fact that human beings can feel pain? Is it a matter of each of us is actually unique?
Yeah.
What is the basis for the rights? And on the machine side, if you take those things as basis, and I would tell you, feeling pain is probably an important one because we extend these rights to animals these days, and to honor our evolution, the fact that it took so many millions of years to produce our DNA. If you look at it from the ethical perspective, AI doesn't have any real reason to have rights. On the other hand, if AI can think and act like a human, then why shouldn't it have rights? So this causes us to go all the way back to the beginning and discuss why human beings have rights. I mean, you can go back to the United States Declaration of Independence and Constitution, and it says that people, humans, have unalienable human rights. It doesn't say machine rights. It says inalienable human rights. And we have to determine what the basis of that is, and if, depending on what the basis is, whether it extends to machines or not.
Absolutely, sir. Ultimately, it boils down to what data it has been trained on. If you put garbage, the garbage will be out. Garbage in, garbage out.
That's right. That's right. And right now, it's just a matter of training.
Yeah.
And so there is some curation going on. But the newest version of ChatGPT now has logical capabilities. It's
Yeah.
not just a statistical engine.
Yeah.
And so the logic that you gave me for this trolley problem
Yeah.
could be that, and we see that people can apply logic to any decision they make, and you
Yeah.
can usually find a logical path. And in fact, humans do this all the time.
Yeah.
We still think with our midbrains. We're emotional creatures. And most of the time, people make their decisions and then they use their computational ability to rationalize what they've already decided.
Yeah.
And so you can see people can rationalize anything using their logic rather than using their logic to make the decision, because most people's emotional brains are hormonally based and they make decisions practically instantly.
Yeah.
It takes us quite a while to think things out. And so if you're going to use logic rather than applying it retroactively, we need to be able to give values to the logic that AI uses. For
Yeah.
example, that humanity is more important than data. And the other thing is the time frame. If you think about this, we all have a limited time frame. The way humans survived was to make decisions to help us survive. That minute, that hour, survive through our lifetime, survive to see our children prosperous. We have no internal mechanism for long-term decisions. We have no internal evolutionary mechanism to decide about what the world's going to be in 100 years. We are only equipped to decide what will help us to survive. And so AI would probably have a much longer time horizon than we will.
Absolutely. Coming to the trolley problem, in one track, one Nobel Prize winner is sitting there, and another track, one normal citizen. Okay, you can only save one person, so who would we save? So initially he refused, but when we forced him, eventually agreed that he will save the Nobel Prize winner. Okay, but then the question is like a twisted. What if one Nobel Prize winner is there, and in the second track, 100 humans is lying there? So who would we save?
Right.
So he ultimately saved the Nobel Prize winner.
Well, these are the problems that we have to confront. And don't be mistaken, there are many humans out there who would have made that same decision. Because we judge and value each other to a large extent. We live in a world where we haven't yet conquered racism or some of the other judgments that we make on people. But again, in the world of ancient times, we had to make these judgments. And the alpha male was considered more valuable than others in the tribe. People were expendable. I don't know if you've ever watched Game of Thrones.
Yes, sir. I
think everyone in the world has seen Game of Thrones. And in those days, the people who were low status people were killed routinely for any reason. And it was only the people at the top, the people who were the
top of the
rulers, the warlords, whose lives were preserved. And it was the job of the people who worked for them, maybe they're knights or others, to preserve their lives. We had big, definite values on people's lives back then, and it hasn't been that long. And so part of what I write in my book is that our society is evolving from a very hierarchical society to one where we're all equal nodes on the network. And this is a lot different than when you had leaders and kings and alpha males. Now we all are moving to a time when we all have equal value and equal ability to communicate and persuade and influence. And that's one of the changes that's happening pretty rapidly.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to look at ourselves before we judge or pointing out the machine which we have created, the man-made intelligence.
Right.
Since we are talking about the ethical angle of the AI, can we talk about how the technology is being misused, especially lately? Have you heard about the news that Israel has bombed Pager in Lebanon? Have you come across that news?
Are you talking about where the pagers and the cell phones blew up?
Yeah.
Yes, we've heard that, yes.
Yeah, that is exactly. So for those who are unaware, I would like to give a context here. You know what is happening with Israel and its surrounding countries like Lebanon. There is a fear in Lebanon that Israel might hack modern devices like smartphones and computers to track Lebanon's secret plans against Israel. So to tackle that, Lebanon used to rely on outdated technology for communication, such as pagers, walkie-talkies, which is not an IoT device, so it is immune to hack. But it has been alleged that Mossad, the intelligence service of Israel, visited the factory where these pagers were manufactured, which is apparently located in Taiwan, and somehow managed to implant a chip into those pagers. Then Lebanon purchased these pagers in large quantities, and this modification allowed Mossad for a remote short circuit of the lithium-ion batteries which is located inside that pager, and ultimately leading to the blast. While this is an allegation regarding whether Israel is behind this or if any other country is involved, which remains to be seen, my question is, what your thought on this implication of such technology misuse?
Well, I think it's very interesting, and what went off in my mind is that it is a complete contrast from the way Israel has been handling Gaza. And I don't want to get into who's right or wrong. I'm just going to talk about the technology. And in Gaza, Israel was using large bombs to try to blow up the tunnels and where Hamas was hiding. And I think they've had a good deal of success, but unfortunately, there were a lot of innocent people hurt in the process because they were unable to specifically target the Hamas individuals. And so a lot of civilians were injured or dead. We all know this, and Israel claims that that was the only way to get to these people. Conversely, this latest attack through the pagers and the walkie-talkies the following day was extremely targeted. And because these pagers were Hezbollah pagers for Hezbollah members. And so to me, the second method is far preferable because we're losing far fewer innocent people and they're targeting their enemies. Look, we're always going to have war. Interestingly enough, when we were evolving, war had a purpose because the strongest warriors were the ones whose DNA moved forward. The ones who were too weak, their DNA was eliminated. And so it was an easy way to evolve. And animals in the animal kingdom often have wars as well, especially chimps and other primates. But at this point in our history, okay, all of our warfare is through technology. And so the winner is not the biggest, strongest human. It's the smartest human with the best technology. You saw this in World War II when the U.S. ended World War II with the atomic bomb. You see this in many other places with drone technology or other technologies. And so we've evolved to the point that the winner of a war is going to be the one who utilizes technology the best. So from Israel's perspective, this was just the next step. And quite frankly, I feel that I would much rather see terrorists individually targeted than having to kill a lot of innocent people in the process. So I prefer this technology to what they were doing in Gaza.
Yep. That's definitely an interesting way to look at this thing. Just like earlier you mentioned that the alpha male perspective and the survival of the fittest mindset. If you are strong enough, you will be survived. Like we humans, we survived. For example, we sapiens, we killed the Neanderthals to protect ourselves.
Right.
So definitely that's an interesting perspective. But coming to what happened in Lebanon, don't you think that this pager thing, how they were able to blast the pager remotely, could lead to the creation of a bigger door? Imagine if our smartphones, which have reached almost every part of the world, might already have the necessary chip to make them an IED, the improvised explosive device, that could be activated by someone far away in a certain situation. It's like every one of us is carrying an explosive device that could technically be exploded in certain situation by somebody.
It is, but I don't know how things are where you live, but in the United States, we have people with guns. We have more guns in the United States than people, actually. It's amazing how many million guns there are. And every day we have mass shootings in the United States. And so what we're talking about is one tool versus another tool for killing. I don't condone either one. But whether someone walks up to you with a gun or whether they blow up your cell phone, to me, doesn't make too much difference. Again, a car can be a weapon. People, there's weapons all over the place. I actually, in some ways, prefer this methodology because it's more targeted. In the U.S., when they have mass shootings, sometimes someone takes out 10 or 20 people just trying to get one. And of course, you heard Donald Trump was shot at not long ago, and someone else was killed in the process rather than him. So it doesn't bother me as much that these phones could be used as weapons because there's so many weapons out there already.
So basically you are saying that the Israeli way is more specific or targeted than the older method we used in war, which were more generalized and could cost many lives. Yeah, that is an interesting perspective.
Think of a war where only the enemy was killed, no innocent people. That would be ideal. If you have to have war, wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to kill any innocent people? And that's almost what the Israelis have accomplished.
Yeah. That's definitely an interesting perspective, sir. Since we talking about the AI, and we know that AI, it is very good at pattern recognition and all. AI kind of predict the natural disaster. So I recently had a guest on my podcast who is a renowned environmentalist from Canada. I asked her, do you think the earth is not designed to accommodate such large number of people, which is why we see so many problems on our planet, problem like natural disaster? She made an interesting point. While we are 7 billion people living in this planet, only a few responsible for the 90% of the problems of our earth. A small percentage of people and countries are responsible for the 90% of our carbon footprint. For example, not everyone on the planet drives a car. My question is, what your thought on this? Do you think the earth is accommodate even more people, or do you think that we have already reached to a threshold level?
Well, it's interesting because you talk to experts, and when I was young, I thought there was one good opinion, but when you talk to experts, you get different opinions, and I'm going to differ from this other person. I think that the earth is way beyond its capacity to support humans. I think we need to reduce our population. It turns out that most first world countries are now diminishing in their rate of population growth. Some places like Europe and the US, it's actually negative, and we're having less and less people born. We're
Declining
not
state.
even at replacement, yes, not even at replacement level. And back to evolution for a minute, we needed people. When we were in our tribes in the early days, you needed people. You needed people to fight wars. You needed people to go out and find food. You needed people to raise the children. The more people you had, the better your chances of survival for the most part. The bigger tribes would survive better than the smaller ones. It was very simple. But now, because of technology, for the most part, our survival is not in jeopardy, at least in the first world countries. I feel like the decline in population is a natural response to not having threats in your environment. So in first world countries, there's not that many threats in your environment. It's easy to get food. It's easy to reproduce. Shelter's easy to come by. You're kept warm, all these things. And you're fairly confident that your offspring are going to survive. And so you don't need to have as many children. And I think the population declines are part of that. I also feel like to some extent, the sexual ambiguity or sexual fluidity is a little bit part of that too, because the reproductive imperative is no longer necessary in first world countries. Having said that, every person on the planet produces carbon. They consume things. They still burden the planet. They eat food. They take up land. They cause the forests to be cut down. All these things. So I think right now the planet can't really healthily support 8 billion people. Now, the economic argument is, well, if we have less people, we will not be prosperous anymore, because usually the more people you have, the more prosperous you are, because they're consuming. Economically, it makes sense. My answer is that artificial intelligence will allow us to be so much more productive that we really don't need more people. We can be tremendously productive for the people that we are supporting, keep our populations reasonable. Every person uses electricity. They use fuel in some fashion. Even if they don't own a car, the process of making products for them uses fossil fuels. And so I think we're heading for lower population, lower carbon GHG emissions, and tremendous productivity through AI.
Definitely, that is an interesting perspective. Contrary to the what Elon Musk is saying about the population, he is kind of saying that population is going through completely in declining state. So we better to produce more children. So that's why he produced a dozen of children.
Well, Elon is clearly a genius, but lately he's a little off the rails, especially in the US presidential election. He's taken some very interesting positions. And so he doesn't have enough people saying no to him.
Talking about the election, so who do you support, Kamala or Trump?
I support Kamala. And again, I see this as evolution. Donald Trump is the classic alpha male. These were the types of leaders that we've had throughout our history. Big, strong. If you did something they didn't like, you would suffer for it. If you watch the show on Netflix that's called Chimp Empire, they have a tribe of chimps, and they show the alpha male who's in control. And when he comes through, he reminds you exactly of Donald Trump, even though he's a chimp. the way he acts, the way he looks, everything. And so I feel like those types of leaders are a thing of the past. We needed very strong leaders in times when our survival was in jeopardy. We needed that strength. But I feel like now we're in a more egalitarian world, and we need more empathy and more the ability to identify with each other. And I feel like Donald Trump is the model of someone for long past era, and that Kamala would be a much more egalitarian leader and want to give more opportunities to everybody.
Yep, yep. That's an interesting perspective. So we know that AI is very good at pattern recognition. It is being used in medical field, such as predicting the cancer. So what do you think? How far we are from inventing the ultimate vaccine to combat all the disease?
Well, let me back up a little bit to medicine. I think that AI is going to revolutionize medicine on every level. I think it will basically, to a large extent, replace what we consider the traditional doctors. It'll do fantastic diagnosis. It will speed up the development of many drugs because it'll be able to try out many possibilities very quickly. And so I think all that will be happening relatively soon. I don't see a universal vaccine for all diseases, but I do see vaccines for cancer. I see vaccines for other things, perhaps Alzheimer's disease or, dementia. I think our major diseases, we will be able to figure out much more quickly through AI, the causes, and find cures much more quickly. So 60 or 70 years from now, I think dementia will be solved. I think almost no one will be dying from cancer. I think we will have solved almost all of our diseases. However, the one that might not be solved is the general decline that comes with age. And so while we may not have classical dementia, things slow down as you age. Your skin gets wrinkly, it loses its elasticity. That may not be a problem that we can fix, for example. You start to lose your taste. It's more difficult to move around. It's more difficult to keep muscle mass. These are metabolic problems or genetic problems. Those may not be so easily solved, but I think cancer, dementia, some of these other things, AI will probably get us cures in the not too distant future.
So you're saying that the lifespan of the human will not increase, but we will ultimately have a vaccine for all the major diseases.
Well, I think it'll increase, in the aggregate because you won't be losing people to cancer and things like that. But I've observed in my older relatives that over time, even when they had no specific diseases, they just got very tired. They moved very slowly. They didn't have the abilities they once had. They didn't have the interest in things that they once had.
But it's all subjective, right? It's depend upon how the person is lived, how their lifestyle is.
To some extent, but I've just watched my relatives as they've gotten older. And basically you slow down and you're not as motivated. And sometimes you just die of old age and your systems just stop working. In the case of my mom, her skin became so fragile that her bodily fluids were leaking through the cells and she just couldn't support life anymore. And so that dramatic aging we may not be able to overcome. But I think the things that we call diseases, we probably will. So the lifespan will go up a bit. I don't think we're ever going to have an average lifespan of 150 or 160.
Do you remember that the one millionaire, if I'm not mistaken, it is from US? Time to time, he changed his entire blood from a younger person so that he will dodge the aging.
I've heard that actually is helpful. But I mean, we'll be able to do some things. We'll be able to do some things, but I just don't think that we'll ever be able to extend it 300-400 years.
Yep.
It's like your car. Look at your car, and after a while, things break and you fix them. And after a while, you say, gee, this car has 300,000 miles and everything is old.
Yeah.
And at that point, you want to replace it. And even though nothing in particular is broken, it's just, it doesn't ride the way it used to. It's just old.
Yep. And another point is once the
Mhm.
people is living longer than the usual, then the burden to the earth increased, right? It will be bad for our nature.
Right. And that's another reason that our population is naturally declining because people have longer lives and we don't need as many people. So when people died when they were in their 30s, you needed more people to do things. Now we have people living to 100 normally. And so again, we don't need as many people. I feel like humans are inherently smart enough to, as a population, figure out what what is best. And again, everything in evolution has to do with need to survive. The reason we did anything was because it helped us to survive. That includes social skills, that includes having tribal religions, it includes all kinds of things. Belief in God helped us to survive, all these things. But as we find they're not necessary, we typically don't use them as much. And having children is another thing. We're an adaptable species and we will adapt. Now, during the adaptation period, things can get pretty ugly because we have people who are on one side and people who are on the other side. But as a species, we will adapt. We're not going to get smarter. Our brains aren't going to get any bigger. We're not going to have those giant heads that you see in sci-fi movies because we don't need that. We're going to have what we need and exist with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, sir, let's talk about the business perspective of AI a bit. You know, LLM, the large language model, kind of dominate the AI landscape today. I remember a famous case study when the refrigerator was discovered for the very first time. It was such a revolutionary discovery back then when it was discovered like 100 years ago. People thought those who would go long and bet the company that produced the refrigerator would be the winner. But cut to the 100 years later, the company that leveraged the refrigerator are becoming the winner, not the one who made the refrigerator. Company like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, all the beers company are the example. So similarly, we have companies that are responsible for making this large language model like GPT, ChatGPT possible by developing hardware and the AI chips are currently getting big. Company like Nvidia, it recently touched the $3 billion market cap. Now, as we are witnessing that the LLM, the large language model, are becoming the commodity, it become the commoditized. Lately, we have seen tons of both open and closed source LLM model, like the Meta is creating, the Mark Zuckerberg is creating the Llama, and the Mistral French company, they are releasing the open source version of their LLM. It is clear that the LLM space is getting a tough competition and it's ultimately benefit for us, but it's becoming a commodity. The LLM as a whole market is becoming a commodity. So will I be right if I say that companies that only focus on LLMs will be just another refrigerator company, whereas the real money lies under the hardware, like the AI chips? Or do you think it's early to say this? What do you think?
I think you're right. I think, first of all, the first people in a given field oftentimes don't survive. The very first Mosaic internet browser, you may not have even heard of it, but the first internet browser that I saw was called Mosaic, and then there were some others that came afterwards.
I think I read about it, yeah.
Yeah, and so they don't necessarily survive. Microsoft has been a good case of survival, for example. But AI is going to make practically every product better. It's going to make customer service better. It's going to make medicine better. It's going to make pretty much everything you can think of that interacts with humans. Anytime there's human interaction, AI is going to improve it. In addition, there'll be robots, which really are available now, self-driving cars, all these things. And economically, all of these folks will probably be winners. The people that control the data will probably be winners as well, because even though you have LLMs, you constantly have to retrain them as things change. So you can't build an LLM model and then just use inference forever. The world changes pretty quick. So we're constantly going to have to be retraining these LLMs. And the people who have the data will probably always be the ones who make the most money from it. But having said that, there's going to be many, just like as you mentioned, refrigeration means that we now have frozen food, that we can now have milk that stays for a week at a time, that we can have cheese and all these other things that we couldn't store before. There are many, many winners, and it's going to be a big deal. So some of these guys will go out of business. You take someone like Anthropic, who Claude is a
Claude.
great product.
Yeah.
Of the ones I've used, I kind of like that the best.
Me too, sir.
And
Yeah.
oh yeah, I mean, I really like it. But the chances of them being around as Anthropic 20 years from now are not big. Microsoft will still be around. Claude will either go out of business or someone will buy them or something will happen. And a lot of these small startups, it's going to be the same thing. Um, it's amazing to me how similar when you work with Gemini, when you work with OpenAI, when you work with Copilot, which is a variant of OpenAI, most of these large language models give you pretty similar output. Claude was a little different. And similarly, when you do the artwork, the generative AI artwork, I've been trying to get specific pieces of art. In particular, I'm looking for Young's dual slit experiment. I want AI to make a diagram of that for me, and none of the models could do it. It's Thomas Young's experiment. It's a real classical quantum physics thing.
Have you tried with the new GPT model, the reasoning model?
I haven't tried the new one. I probably should, but it's funny. It comes up with the interference pattern, but it doesn't relate. I think the new GPT model that has some logic, I don't think it's yet applied to the graphics, but when they will eventually be able to do it. But I'm just amazed how similar they are when you ask them questions or ask them to write something or whatever.
Yep. If you do some reasoning stuff, you will pick a certain model. If you need some image generation, then you will pick a certain model. If you want to coding, then you will pick a certain model.
That's right.
Eventually, we are heading to this kind of thing. Another thing is, as you mentioned, that data is being used. It is very difficult to getting the legalized data. So interesting thing they are doing is they are making the synthetic data. How come possibly they make a synthetic data? So when I dig deeper, what they mean by the synthetic data? Let's say if you are using the data of Twitter, the X. If you go to Twitter and use the data, then what will happen is Elon Musk will sue you. But what will you do is, instead of using raw data of the Twitter, you will put those data into a AI algorithm and mask those data out, so that it will be not obvious that you will copied and got those data from the Twitter. So this is the smart way they're bypassing this legal issue, which is related to the data.
Yeah, no, and it is smart. And, again, in the legal system, there's a case to be made that says, of course, our data is copyrighted. But on the other hand, things that are on Twitter that are contributed by many people, it's public information. And it's available to the public. The people, when they post on social media, in my opinion, give up any copyright privileges they have because they're just posting it without that. So again, another interesting legal question. I like what the synthetic data is, but you can lose some nuances through that. The bigger question is this. You can train an LLM with Twitter, or you can train an LLM with the New York Times, for example. The New York Times is primarily factual. Twitter isn't. And so if you use Twitter to train, there's a lot of inaccuracies, conspiracy theories, all kinds of things. Maybe not half, but a lot of those people are bots. They're not even real people on Twitter. And what is the value of that data? And not only that, it's only data from Twitter users, which is a subset of the population. And a fairly radical one at that. And so how do we decide what we use to train? That's a big problem.
The garbage in, garbage will out.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So this is why they precisely making this synthetic data. I given the Twitter example, but they made this because they want to use the New York Times data. They want to use the BBC. They want to use the Times of India without getting any copyright issue. They are becoming really smart in this regard. But as you told earlier, whichever the public data, that should be a public, like you mentioned that whatever in Twitter, that would be in public. So unless the European Union intervene to this, we do not have much hope about it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
We can't predict who will be the winner in this AI race. Do you agree that if someone making the hardware at this point, maybe the higher chance of the winning the race, then the one who are just focusing on the LLM, just like you mentioned the Anthropic, who made the Claude.
Right. No, I agree. It's the hardware manufacturers. Yeah. NVIDIA obviously being the best. AMD is going to be putting out some good products.
Yeah.
But there's only maybe 3 or 4 or 5 chip manufacturers that will ever, in the near term, have the kind of processing power that we need. And then eventually there'll be people who are doing quantum computation. Yeah. IBM's probably the leader right now. These hardware projects there's so many barriers to entry that you just can't go in and do them. I mean, the technology that's required, only Taiwan Semiconductor right now can make the chips. Only NVIDIA or maybe AMD can design the chips.
Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult. So there's big barriers to entry. But there's almost no barrier to have a startup that says they're going to process medical data better than the next guy. And those people will go in and out of business. Yes, NVIDIA will eventually have competition. But again, if you look at the people who make hardware on the planet, look at our phones. There's 5 companies that make phones. There's Apple, Samsung, Google, Huawei, and probably 1 or 2 others because it's so complex. And those are ultimately the winners, those phone manufacturers.
Yeah. There are many players in past, but they ultimately gave up because they couldn't able to compete. The prime example would be the Nokia and LG. Once upon a time, Nokia was the leading entire world in terms of phone, but suddenly the company is completely vanished, completely out of the race.
Right. Once you lose your technology edge, people don't, but it's so expensive that, even if you look at televisions, there's probably 5 people who make TVs. It's primarily Samsung and LG, and there's a few others, but not many. Any big technology thing just requires so much investment. You can't have a lot of people in that space.
Yep. Absolutely. So the company who produced the phone as their brand, but most of the time they are doing just the white labeling. They are just bought the phone, many company from the China, and just putting the logo of their company and make them people believe that this is made by them. But ultimately, it's the same company.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So, sir, have you heard the news about the Sam Altman is seeking to raise $7 trillion from the Middle East to create a AI chip company?
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
$7 trillion?
$7 trillion. Trillion with three.
I haven't heard that news, but the level of expertise required, regardless of the money, is stunning. There's only 2 or 3 companies. Lam Research is one, Applied Materials is the other. There's only 2 or 3 companies that build the equipment to build the chips.
Yeah. Sam Altman is currently seeking the money, but we don't know whether he will able to achieve. But given his credibility in this AI space and the money is getting from the Middle East.
Wouldn't it be just easier to buy NVIDIA stock?
Yeah. So, sir, it is kind of clear that everybody kind of realized that the real money lies on the hardware side, not the LLM side.
Right. Even Intel in the US is struggling.
Yeah.
So Intel has not
money, but still they cannot, unable to.
Right. So Intel was the leader for many years in microprocessors, and they lost their edge technologically. Now there's questions about whether they're even going to be able to stay in business. If you remember, the PCs for many years were all Intel.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now, not so much. Yeah. And they may not survive in their current form if they can't keep up with the technology. It's very hard, very expensive. And remember, they have a company full of experts. So imagine what it would be like to start from scratch. But the LLMs, back to your point, when Google sells its AI to companies, what they have is the general large language model that they'll include, but then they get each company to train up their own module that has the specific information for the company.
Yeah.
So let's say you're General Motors and you want to do a model for customer service for Chevrolet. They teach that model all the particulars about Chevrolets, how often you change the oil, what's the tire pressure, if something's not working, what it is. And that's specific for Chevrolet. And that's how Google is now selling this to businesses.
Yep. Definitely. I would like to say 2 things here. First is the Intel thing. I think you are right. Intel is completely in a declining state. Ever since Apple dropped Intel from their computer, like when they introduced the M1 Mac, they completely
Mm-hmm.
switched over their own in-house silicon. So that is a one big
Mm-hmm.
reason
Mm-hmm.
declining of the Intel. And sir, another thing is the generative AI which we currently seeing is I do remember much before the ChatGPT, Google kind of giving some demo about it, like how
Mm-hmm.
their AI model is powerful. In fact, that the generative AI, the GPT, it is the paper which Google was earlier released. On that paper, OpenAI engineer has worked on it, and then they released the GPT-1. So it is
Mm-hmm.
the pioneer of this technology, Google. But the thing is, Google was very slow in this process. If we
Yes.
rely on Google, we couldn't have the generative AI thing in this wide manner.
Yeah, Google was slow with it. It's when you have a large company,
Too much to lose.
the culture is such that usually things slow down. You need an agile, small company to make things like this work, like OpenAI, for example.
Yeah, yeah.
And people in large companies, they're generally not rewarded for innovation the way they are at small companies.
Yep,
It's
yep,
more a matter of keeping your job in large companies.
yep,
So
yep,
there's a lot going on here, but
yep.
we will see where it's going. I'm very encouraged that it's going to be a force for good rather than evil. There will be, of course, some instances where it's not doing good, but I think in general, it's going to be a very positive force in everyone's life and in the evolution of mankind.
Yep, sir. Absolutely. You said that it won't be evil. I just remembered the tagline of the Google, the earlier tagline, "Don't be evil." Google's tagline. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, sir, so what is your nowadays? Do you use any paid LLM, or you rely on completely on the free version because there are plenty of free version out there?
Well, I generally rely on the free versions. We have a paid version of Copilot.
Hmm.
I have used the paid version of oh God, what's it called?
Mid journey.
The graphic. Yeah, I've used
Yeah.
the paid version of that at
Yeah.
times when I've needed to. But there's been so many free versions coming out
Yeah.
that I've been anxious to try them out as they come out. And I'll try the same problem on three or four different ones.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm doing now is I'm asking it for its opinion on things. So rather than having it write things, for example, for my book, I'll write two different blurbs and I'll say, which of these would the average reader find most appealing?
Hmm.
And it'll say, oh, version 2 is better, and it'll tell you why.
Hmm.
And I really like its ability to critique my work, not to generate it,
Hmm.
but to critique it and to say, oh, you know, you might be stronger on adding another paragraph on something or
Hmm.
whatever it is. But I find it fascinating because if I show those same two paragraphs to a human, they might be able to tell me which one they like better, but they almost can never tell me why.
Yeah. Yeah. So, sir, can we talk about your book?
Sure.
What inspired you to write your first book, The Evolution Ended? If I'm not mistaken, it is your first book, right?
It's actually my second one, but it's the first one that I published. The second one we're trying to get published now. But Evolution ended as I noticed the change in mankind over the years. I started to question why. And I went back to our evolution and discovered that every human behavior, everything we did, work, living in tribes, everything you can think of, was for our own survival. It was to promote biological survival of the fittest evolution.
Yeah.
And then I started to look at our society and see that we were not moving forward in the past 50 years in first world countries and started to question why. And when I started to look at it, I started to realize that technology has made our survival almost a foregone conclusion. And starting in the 1950s, when medical science started to come to the forefront and we got antibiotics that allowed people to survive, we got the polio vaccine, we got all these things that took away childhood diseases. And now we could survive much better. We learned to do surgery. Then we got the birth control pill. So now we were not reproducing randomly. Now, interestingly enough, the people who were the people who were the forward thinkers, the people who thought about the future, were reproducing less than the people who were not thinking things out. And so, from a population perspective, the doctors, the lawyers, the people with the high IQs, the people who they had less children than the other people. So that would be something that would go against normal evolution in the sense that it was your fittest who reproduced the most in the old days. And then we started to see how we no longer have to fight for food and how our agriculture is so advanced in our transportation systems that anyone can find enough to eat, that you don't have to be smart to hold the job, that our computers have made it such that even bright people don't need to be as bright because they have things like AI to help them. Okay. So we now find that survival is pretty easy. We don't need to spend all our time working or trying to provide for ourselves. Now we watch TV and do all kinds of recreational things. And so this technology has made a huge difference, even in fighting wars. It's the one with the best technology that wins now. So everything that biological evolution, even attracting a mate, biological evolution, if you could attract a mate, your DNA was going to survive. Well, now we have cosmetic surgery that you can attract a mate. So every aspect of traditional evolution has been derailed by technology. And that's what led to me writing the book.
That's interesting, sir. Though I haven't read the whole book, I just read the simple one, to be honest. But it's really interesting. I really want to read the whole book. So one thing you mentioned there is cyber anthropology. Could you explain what the cyber anthropology is?
Well, anthropology is basically the study of our evolution and how mankind has moved forward through tribes and civilizations and all those types of things.
Yeah.
But now we have the influence of computers and digital technologies.
Yeah.
And that's the cyber part. And we're studying human anthropology in the cyber age. And that's really what the book's about, and how we will transcend all of our traditional models, including the alpha male led hierarchical society. We're moving towards becoming nodes on a network, more of a hive model, more like a beehive or an ant colony, where we all are pretty much equal. We could take on various roles as we need to, just like in the ant colony. If they need more worker ants, they become workers. Less sexualized, and all pretty much equal nodes on the network. And so everything that we once were is changing, and changing pretty quickly. The good news is, in the old days, if you didn't have the best DNA, you probably wouldn't survive. If you didn't have the best DNA, you might not have offspring. These days, we're not a prisoner of our DNA. We can be pretty much whatever we want to be with the help of technology. And so, as individuals, we're far better off.
Yep. So what one message that you like to give through your book?
I think the main message of the book in the end is that the old ways of survival, the fittest evolution, are over. We're no longer prisoners of our DNA or where we were born. Now, anything we dream can be a possibility, and we're all empowered to do that.
Yeah. And any other book which is you currently writing?
Well, one's in the planning stage, and it's called Death of the Alpha Male. And it's about almost the same thing. But interestingly, we now are facing in the US an election between an alpha male and a black female. This represents more than just the election. I think this represents who would hold the power and the egalitarian nature of society, or at least where it's heading. So I think even Donald Trump wondered out loud recently. He said, how can a female be beating me in the polls? And I think if Kamala wins, it's going to mark the beginning of a change in the way we think about our society, where a regular woman could beat a rich, powerful alpha male. And I think it's going to be a big thing. So that's one thing that's in work. And the other thing that's in work is called the intelligence. And it purports that the universe is actually a quantum computer that has evolved over time, and that what we call matter serves as memory, and that information is exchanged by photons, and that it is the evolution of the universe that has organized everything through the mechanisms of quantum physics and brought together atoms and molecules and eventually life and consciousness.
That's very interesting, sir. We are on the final segment of our podcast. This segment is called Instant Insights. I will ask you some quick question. You have to respond as fast as you can.
Okay.
So, are you ready?
I hope so.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Beach or mountains?
Mountains.
City or countryside?
Countryside.
Blue or green?
Blue.
Most used app on your phone?
Spotify.
Early bird or night owl?
Night owl.
Introvert or extrovert?
Extrovert.
Most recent hobby that you picked up?
Pickleball.
Define yourself in one line.
I simplify the complex.
What is your go-to stress relief method?
Exercise.
One thing you wish you knew when you were younger?
I wish I knew that people don't judge you on what you know or how smart you are. They judge you on how you make them feel.
Interesting. Best way to spend a weekend?
For me, either watching football, American football, or sailing.
Interesting. If you could change 3 things about the world, what would it be?
I'd love to see people think with their forebrains rather than their midbrains. In other words, base their lives on facts rather than emotions and fiction.
Yeah.
I'd like to see the world give everybody an equal chance, regardless of whether they were born rich or born poor. I think everybody deserves an equal chance to be whatever it is they want to be. And I think people should learn less to compete and more to love each other.
That's interesting. So people should use their brain. And second is that shouldn't be nepotism. And third is the love.
I don't know if I call it nepotism, but when you're born rich, you have a lot of advantages. And when you're poor, you have a lot to overcome.
Yep. If you could have any dinner guest, dead or alive, who would it be?
Albert Einstein.
Best gift you have ever received?
A card from my son telling me how much he thanked me for being a good dad.
Lovely. Best compliment you have ever received?
That I made people feel good.
I vouch for it.
Thank you.
One thing you would like to learn?
I'd like to learn how to make people feel good more often.
Favorite book?
Favorite book is probably A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. Have you read it?
Yes, sir.
Oh, that's incredible.
I love his documentary and his book. Yep.
That's probably my favorite.
Yep. Have you seen The Cosmos, Carl Sagan?
Yes, I love that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Favorite movie?
You're going to laugh, but it's probably The Millers. It's a comedy movie. It's a Jason Sudeikis movie. It just makes me laugh all the time. It's called The Millers. You may not have seen it. I don't know.
Interesting. You have seen the world both before and after the digital age, the pre and post internet era. So, based on your vast experience, what are the things that your generation had that new generation lacked?
Connectedness to each other. We used to live in neighborhoods. All of the moms in the neighborhoods looked after all the kids. We just go into each other's homes without even knocking. We left the doors open. The kids ran around outside. We all played together from morning until dinner time. And then after dinner, we spent a lot of time with each other. We had adventures. We enjoyed our childhood. Not every minute was planned or programmed like it is now. Not everything was competitive. We just were together and enjoyed being together. And our families were more connected. Our friends were more connected. And now we're just connected digitally and not in the same way.
Yeah. Interesting, sir. So, and vice versa, what are the things that the younger generation has that your generation lacks?
That's hard. But I think the younger generation has the ability to be more what they want to be than we did. And there's a lot more flexibility out there. We would grow up in a town. I don't know if you've ever heard of Bruce Springsteen, but he memorializes all this in his songs. You'd live in your little town and you'd probably grow up to do what your dad did, and things would remain the same. You'd stay with your tribe and your family. People have a lot more independence now. They live wherever they want to live. They do whatever they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't shackled by some of the bounds. Travel's easy that we had.
Interesting. Best way to handle success.
I'm not sure that even when you succeed, you feel like you succeed. There's always something. And I think if you look at people who are famous, and I'm not one of them, but you look at the big rock stars, the movie stars, I think most of them retain their humility because they realize that maybe they haven't succeeded entirely and there's always more to achieve.
Best way to handle the failure.
I think you have to realize that failure is inevitable. We all fail. It isn't personal, and that the higher your aspirations, the more likely you're going to fail. So if you have high aspirations, you should certainly expect to fail. And success is not guaranteed to anyone.
Yep, yep.
You know, I'm trying to remember his name. Lenny Kravitz. Do you know him, the singer?
Mm-hmm.
So he's a rock star in the US. And he said, we're all trying the best we can, and 80% of why we succeed or fail is luck.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get lucky, you have a great life. If you don't get lucky, you might not. It's not to be taken personally. It's just the statistics of living.
Mm-hmm. One word to describe the future of AI.
Right.
The biggest opportunity presented by AI.
The opportunity for any of us to be whatever we want. We won't need to specialize knowledge. We'll just be able to decide we want to do this and let AI do the details.
Biggest danger of AI.
Well, the biggest danger is what everybody thinks is it'll get into everybody's system and it'll start to go off and do its own thing. I would maintain that it's less malicious than human beings are. And right now, human beings are hacking many systems. And so I don't think it's going to be that dangerous.
Will AI ever truly conscious?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's not that far away. And I think we overrate our own consciousness. I talk about this in the book a little bit. What is it to be conscious? Well, most people would say it's self-awareness of sorts. And yet, looking at the latest AI, it can walk through a room and know all the objects in the room. It knows what they're used for. It can know how they interact. It can know its origin. It can know its purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And when you really break it down, I feel like what we call consciousness might be overrated. We're just simply aware of our surroundings and our condition. And I think AI will be conscious in the not too distant future.
Interesting. This question we have touched this a bit. Should AI have rights?
I'm very torn on that because we talked about the basis for rights. Is it pain? Is it evolution? Is it the fact that our DNA's evolved over the years? What gives us rights? And I'm not sure that there's any underlying basis for giving AI rights. If we do give AI rights, it opens up a big Pandora's box, because then we will not be able to turn it off. It'll be able to own things. It'll be able to vote in the elections. It'll be able to take custody of children, not in a bad way, but just a robot might take care of children. It'll be able to own businesses. And I don't know that it's entitled to rights. We'll have to let it unionize. We'll have to pay it.
Yep. Will AI create more jobs or destroy them, according to you?
I don't think it's going to create more jobs in the long term. I think it will destroy some jobs. But I think with a declining population, that's fine.
Talking about the job loss, what you thought about UBI, the universal basic income?
I think we're going to have to go there. At first, I didn't think it was a good idea, but it may be necessary because if there's less jobs, once robots take over, the manual labor will be minimized, right? And so we may have to go to a UBI model.
Yep. Are we headed for a utopia or dystopia?
I think more of a utopia. But having said that, I think we're going to lose our connectedness to each other. We'll interact through AI avatars. We'll interact virtually a lot more even than we do now. And I'm afraid that we're going to lose that hormonal, biochemical, real in-person connectedness. And we're just going to be a bunch of individuals entertaining ourselves. And so it'll be good, but there's downsides to it.
Mm. Yep, yep. Related to that, another question is the singularity inhabitable?
I don't really believe in the singularity per se, because think about what infinite intelligence means. Think about what intelligence means. The best definition is probably the ability to solve a problem, correct? For intelligence, right?
Yep.
Now, certain problems, even with what you might call infinite intelligence, just can't be solved. But humanity is pretty smart, and we've done a really good job of solving most of our problems so far. We've solved the problem of making efficient lighting with LEDs. We've solved the problem of making electric vehicles. Now, AI will make the electric vehicles better. Maybe they'll be able to go 50% further, but it's not going to solve the problem any better of getting us from point A to point B.
Yep.
We've solved the problem of curing polio. We've solved the problem of refrigerating food. So while it'll make things better, there's only a few giant problems we haven't solved yet. One is making fantastic batteries to help us power the world. One is curing Alzheimer's. One is curing cancer. But even with an infinite intelligence, really, what is going to change? Only a few things.
But what do you think? What is the thing that you worries about the AI?
I guess my main worry is it gets into the systems and creates financial havoc, destroys our economic system,
Yeah.
things like that. I think that's very possible.
Yeah, yeah. So, sir, one last question. What's the best piece of advice that you ever received?
I guess the best piece of advice is to look ahead. Look at what you're going to be or what you want to be 5, 10, 15 years in the future. Don't look at where you are now. You have to look far ahead to make any real progress.
Yep, yep. Look forward.
Look forward.
Yeah. So, sir, that's the end of the podcast. Any final thought?
Well, thank you so much. I had a fun time. Hello, everybody. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe to Shree's podcast, The Billion Insights. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to rate us 5 stars if you enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible insights with us today. Your perspectives on AI, technology, and how they might be shaping our future have given us a lot to think about. I'm sure our listeners gain valuable knowledge on how these emerging technologies could impact both humanity and our planet.
Thanks, Shree. Take care now.
Thank you for joining us. We wish you good health and happiness, sir.
Thank you.
And to our listener, if you want to learn more about J.J. Jerome's work, be sure to check out his book, Evolution Ended, and follow him online for more of his future-focused ideas. All the links can be found in the description. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Billion Insight podcast. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and stay curious. This is Shree, your host, signing out. Peace